and welcome to another Excel demo with Rich Kerr from Apex Excel Training. In today's scenario, we're going to take a look at how you can create a dynamic chart that's driven by the user's selection from a drop-down list, in this case, a location, and that then filters a result set that drives a chart. Now, the result set is a summary from this larger data set on a separate sheet. So this larger data set, the sheet called sales history, has a table. The table is called sales, and there are 10,000 records here. If we were to jump down to say a 10,000, yeah, you can see that we've got 10,000 records. And so many times what we're trying to do in our Excel work is take a large data set and narrow the focus, right? So that someone can digest the information in a way that's easy to consume. There's a reduction of the volume is what we're looking for, but still sort of aggregating and summarizing so that someone can see things from a bird's eye view. This is why we tend to use features like pivot tables in our analysis. But the challenge with the pivot table is that it has a very, I would say, rigid structure. And so depending on how you want to present your data, the pivot table may not be the solution for you. Furthermore, if you're going to let another user manipulate the data, you want them to do that with some guardrails in effect, right? And so a pivot table interface might not be the most intuitive for someone who doesn't use spreadsheets or similar tools. Whereas with something like this, we can direct the user just to hit the drop down arrow, make their selection, and at that time, they'll see the summary data right here, and then they'll see the graphical representation as a chart adjacent to it. And in fact, we could even lock this sheet so the user would only be able to make changes in cell B2. And that's actually a data validation list that is dynamically driven by the data back on the sales history sheet. So there's a few pieces here. I'm going to show you how to set it up. So to get started, I'm going to delete this report, and we're back here on our sales history sheet. I'm also going to expose a hidden column that I'm using for the data validation dropdown, and I'll show you how we create that as well. So there's a couple of steps, but it's all pretty straightforward. So strap in. This is going to be a good one. So my data set is in a table. The table is called sales, and I wish to create that summarizing data set on another sheet. So first, let's create that second sheet. I'm going to hit my plus sign down at the bottom where my sheet tabs are, and let's zoom in just a little bit. And I'm going to start a few rows below the top row because I'm not quite sure everything that I want to put up there. So I'm going to give myself some running room. And I'm going to start with Excel's GroupBy function. So this is a really powerful formula that basically mimics some of what you get from a pivot table. We can tell the GroupBy function how we want to group the data and what sort of calculation we'd like done on that data. Now, the first argument for the GroupBy function is labeled row fields. So back in that table called sales on the sales history tab, we had a column called sales rep, and I want to group by sales rep. So let's start by referencing the table, and we'll say open bracket, and sales rep is the column that I'm wanting to group by, close bracket, comma. Now for the values, I want to do the amount column. So we'll say sales, open bracket. And one of the things I love about using a table structure is that if you don't remember the names of the columns from your table, it's okay, because once you do the open bracket after successfully referencing your table object, you'll see that it's got your table headers, your column headers. So let's go ahead and select amount, close bracket, and then for the function. So because these are sales figures and I'm looking for totals, we're going to do a sum function here. So I'm going to sum up by sales rep. Now, although I'm not finished in terms of what we want this formula to ultimately do, let's pause here. Let's close it off because those first three are the only required pieces, right? Row field, a value, and a function. We're going to elaborate in just a bit, but let's see what we get with just those pieces in place. So we get one instance of each sales rep, and then we get their grand total. If we were to switch back over to the sales history, we look at that sales rep column. Those are, in fact, the sales rep names, but we're only getting one Marsha, one Cindy, etc., and we're totaling up their amounts. Now, one of the things that we see here is that the uh, data does not have that numeric formatting from the original data set. So I'm going to select these cells and turn on my accounting style number format, and I'm going to trim off the 2 decimal places. So I'm not using those decimal places. All right. Now, in the example I showed when we got started, we were just showing a column within a column chart representing each sales rep. And you typically would not have a total for a data set like this if you're representing it in a chart. So let's get rid of the total. I'm going to go back into the original formula. And after the sum function, I'll type a comma. So this first parameter or argument is asking if we want to show headers from the data set. No, we don't want to show any headers. That does not create the kind of layout that we're looking for. So I'm just going to leave that on no. You could also leave it blank, but I'll put a placeholder 0 there, comma. Do I want totals? No, I don't actually. I don't want to see any total at the bottom or any grand totals or subtotals with this data set. It's a very simple, straightforward data set. So I'm going to put a 0 there as well. And then comma, the sort order. So if you wanted to sort by the sales rep name, that's the first column in your result set. So we could put a number 1 here to have it sort by sales rep. So let's stop here and see what it looks like with just those pieces put in place. So no longer is there a total, and I am in order by the sales rep. Okay, so we see that that works. Let's go back into the formula, and at the very end, after that number 1, to say we wanted to sort in ascending order by column 1. By the way, if you wanted to go in descending order by column 1, you would put a -1. So now it's going in reverse order, but still by the first column. Okay, so a -1 to go descending order by column 1, but +1 for ascending. Okay, the last optional parameter is a filter array. So if you only wanted to see data from, let's say, a subset within that, there was a location column, you could say something like sales, open bracket, location equals, and then we could put Chicago, right? And so now we're not seeing all of the data. It has been filtered down for just the Chicago data. So that's pretty powerful too, because you can then limit it if you were doing an assessment based on geography. Now, I wouldn't want my end user to come in here and try to change this location piece. First of all, they might make a typo, right? So there's no city spelled that way. So that's one issue. And the other issue is they don't know what cities exist in the list, perhaps. So we don't want our user to have to guess and say, okay, well, let's see what's going on in Orlando, but we might not have any Orlando values, right? So instead of having a data set that's filtered this way, we can create a user interface that makes it a lot simpler. So I'm going to go to cell A2. I'll type the word locate, or maybe I'll even say select location as kind of a label. And then adjacent to that, I'm going to put a value. Let's try, say, I think we have some Denver values, as for example. So now if I go back in here and say, instead of sales location equals a hard-coded value, I'm just going to select a cell like B2. And yeah, there's some Denver values. So now the end user could come in here and they could type in their own choice and get different results. That's pretty cool. But the issue is, again, typos. typos, and then not knowing if the city even exists in the data set, right? So that can be a problem. So rather than having the user guess and make those kinds of errors, this should really be a drop-down list from the original data set of the various locations. So let's set that up. The first thing that we'll want to do is create a list with the unique entries from all the locations. And I'm going to maybe just do that right here in column D. I'll say equals unique. Okay, so the unique function will generate a list of unique values from a given array. So again, we have our table called sales, open bracket, and then location, close bracket, close paren. So here are all the unique entries from that other sheet. Now, it might work even better if this list was in sort order. So I'm going to sort the unique list of locations. So now we have Atlanta first and Tokyo last. Well, that's great. But what does having the list here have to do with the user making a selection in cell B2? Well, we'll go to cell B2, we'll go to the data tab of the ribbon, and we'll enable data validation, right? So we've got the data validation icon, and the type of validation we're going to use will be a list style validation. So when I choose list, down in the source, I'm simply going to say equals. And then if I click on D2 and click OK, the issue is it's only giving me Atlanta, right? So I wanted to grab this entire list. Well, if we go back there and we go into the data validation tool and I say equals D2 pound sign and click OK, now we have a drop list. The pound sign tells Excel that that is a dynamic list that can grow or shrink. And so it needs to look for the end of that list being generated by that unique function that we have in cell D2. So that's a beautiful thing because I'm not going to try to guess D2 through D16, but then if I add more cities, it could go to D17 or D18. So that's the way to do it. Let me show that to you one more time. Back in the data validation window, for the source of our data validation, I didn't just say equals D2. I did select that cell, but I put the pound sign at the end to let it know that that's a dynamic formula that's in that cell, and it needs to extend to use all those values. Okay. Now I have another video on data validation for all the other settings that you might be interested in, generating custom error messages and all that, but I'm not going to dig into that here. Right now, we have a drop-down list that gives us the various cities, and there we go. Now, the end user doesn't need to see column D, right? Because we're just using it to populate our data validation list. So I will right-click on D and choose hide, right? So even though that column is hidden, I'm still able to select any one of my locations and get this dynamic list. We're almost there, right? So what I'm going to do now is select my array of sales reps and their values, and I'll go to my Insert tab, and I'm just going to do a standard two-dimensional column chart. Okay. So there's my column chart, and Excel's done a really good job, or Microsoft's done a really good job of sort of enhancing the available chart styles gallery. Oh, I actually like this one. I like this one because it's actually putting the values at the end of each column in a vertical arrangement so that it's a little bit easier to see what value is being represented. You know, data labels can be a challenge sometimes in a chart. So look at that. So that's our Denver data. We try Cairo, we get different results. We choose London, different results. So there you go. Now, one issue is the chart is called chart title. And I think it would be great if the chart title actually said London, if that's the city that's been selected. So if you click on the chart title, now we don't want to be in edit mode. We just want to click on the title so that we've got that solid border going around. And we're going to create a formula that will dynamically reflect the selection by the user. So For this type of formula where you're sort of populating a text box on an object like a chart, you have to do it in a somewhat unorthodox way. We click on the title text box, and then we go to our formula bar. So now the formula bar is in edit mode, and let's select cell B2. All right, let's try that one more time. So we're going to go and we're going to come in here and choose equals. There we go. And so now when I hit my check mark, we should have a dynamic reference. That didn't want to work for me. Let's try that one more time. So there we go. Okay, so we now have the name selected or the location selected showing up as the chart title. What I did the second time was after I selected that cell, I hit the enter key. The first time I had hit my confirmation checkbox, and that didn't seem to work. So that might be just a peculiar little quirk with setting the formula in the text box, but hitting the enter key seemed to do the trick. Now, if I choose a different location, we get a different title for our chart. And that looks really, really cool. And again, you have all the different stuff that you can do with your chart still. I mean, it's a regular chart from a design perspective. Um, Sometimes what I like to do with chart like this, where everything is from the same series of data, right? So everybody's column is blue right now. Some people kind of like that monochrome motif, and sometimes I do too. It just is really depends on what kind of dashboard you're going to be placing this on. But if you want to show a different color for each sales rep, it's pretty easy to do. I'm going to right click on one of the columns and I'm going to choose the option that says Format Data Series. Format Data Series. And in the pane that appears on the right-hand side, I'll go to the paint can icon, and where it says Fill, I will expand that and choose the option that says Vary Colors by Point. Vary Colors by Point, and then I'll close that pane. So now you're getting a different color for each rep. Again, just a stylistic consideration for you to think about for your chart. But there you go. You now have a dynamic chart. I think in the initial example, I also had gone to the Format tab and I threw a border on my chart. And of course, you can, adjust the thickness of the border, all those sorts of interesting things. You can play around with fills and shadows and that kind of thing to really enhance the way that your chart looks. But that's it. And then we could just change this to say sales report, and it's dynamic. And to illustrate how this works, if we go back to sales history, and let's say that we've got some other city located here, right? So, in fact, I'm just going to populate a few entries as Orlando, right? So I'll put a few Orlando entries in here. We'll just kind of mix it up a bit. And then I will select my new entries. We'll make this first one Orlando as well. And then I'm going to select, I think I had gone all the way down a little bit with that Orlando entry. And I'm just going to fill that all the way down. So we now know we've got some Orlando data in our sales history. So if I go back to the sales report, in fact, when I came back here, I saw the chart changed because now some of the entries that were Detroit are different because we changed that whole location column. And now if I go to this drop down, if we scroll down a bit, there's Orlando. So Orlando is in the list and it works. So now that you have this set up, if your data changes, you don't have to do anything different. If you had a different sales rep, if we come back over to our sales history, and let's say there were some other entries in here, we'll say that there was, we'll say, we'll create a Tony entry. And then we'll create a Larry and a Susan. Okay. So just a few additional reps. We'll drag that down. And then I'm going to double click to populate the sales rep column all over again. So now when I go back to my sales report, there you go. There's Susan and Tony. Now, the other thing that's interesting is we have added two more rows to our sales rep summary. And initially, I had selected down to row 15 for my numeric formatting. So that is one caveat. If this data set expands, you might find that you have to do some additional formatting. Outside of that, it's pretty low maintenance. I hope you like it, folks, and you can use this in your analysis and in your reports. Please come back soon for more Excel demos with Rich Kerr from Apex Excel Training. Have a productive day. Peace.